North Carolina is our top story in the news review. Just have a look at the picture on the front of the Independent. You have protesters facing off against police in riot gear here. Protests flared in Charlotte following the death of Keith Lamont Scott, a 43-year-old black man, and police shot him dead. They say he was armed and a threat. His family say he was not armed and was holding a book.
This is the front page of the Financial Times. Of course, it devotes a lot of its attention to the US Federal Reserve meeting, where rates were left unchanged, but they could be increased before the end of the year.
In the same paper, the British Prime Minister Theresa May is planning to shame overpaid bosses by publishing what they earn compared to their employees.
In France, the Daily Le Figaro looks ahead to next week's Africa 2016 Business Summit in Paris. The conference hopes to actively promote economic and human ties between Africa and France for a shared future.
Sounds like it came from a press release, I think. The UK Secret Service MI6 is recruiting almost 1,000 spies to fight global terror. The Times says the agency is hoping to attract recruits from a wide ethnic background, but they'll have to be able to use digital technology. MI6 hopes to use their skills to target the Islamic State group and their supporters throughout the world.
And here's The Guardian. This is the story I mentioned earlier. There are lots of reports out there that a deal could be done between Apple, who would pay up to £1.5 billion for the supercar maker McLaren. Although McLaren is denying it is in talks with Apple, any discussions could highlight the tech giant's ambitions to develop technology that could be used in driverless cars. I don't mind one of those. You know, you've got to drive it or someone else drive it.
That's about £900,000,
Doesn't
that
bother
car.
me.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we should publish your salary. Cornelia Meyer is here, CEO of MRL Corporation, a business consultancy. Good morning, Cornelia.
I would need one of those. I can't drive.
Yeah, well, you see, you should have
a
staff.
driverless McLaren would be suit Cornelia.
Yeah,
I think.
that's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
I could see that whizzing around Kensington, you know.
Fantastic.
Not the F1 car, the luxury car. Right, OK, you know what? Who has the answers? Who has the answers to what's happening in the United States? But on a practical level, maybe if police uniforms had a camera that recorded everything, but then there's the sociological level, which is clearly more important, is the attitude of the police towards young black men.
Well, apparently they are not. They haven't released. There may be footage. There may not be. They haven't released it yet. So, because for some sort of legal purposes, but I think the real story here is the racial tension that is still there, and that, you know, we every other month we see something like that. Somebody shot, and usually some white policeman shooting some African American or ethnic gentleman. And there's always controversy ensues, and it's just indicative of really bad race relations.
Yes, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about this again as we get towards the 8th of November, because everything becomes a political issue as we get closer to that presidential election. But
it's interesting, though, because we talk about bad race relations in the States, but also one of the other issues that's major in the States, and it's major in many, many developed economies, is inequality. Oh, yeah. And the difference between the haves and the have-nots. Now, that's an economic issue, and Janet Yellen was taking centre stage again yesterday. She decided to keep the cost of borrowing, her and her team, I should say, at the Fed, unchanged. She talked about the fact the economy is doing better, but she wants further evidence before they decide to increase the cost of borrowing again. But it's interesting how the issue of the economy is not necessarily dominating this run-up to the election in November, but it's all intertwined, isn't it?
Well, it's absolutely
all
intertwined.
The lack of money and the difficult living standards in the United States.
It's interesting. I've listened very carefully. I listened into her press conference yesterday, and I listened very carefully, and she was very, very deliberate in how she articulates, which she always is. But looking at it, she basically said, look, we have enough evidence that we could raise that rates could rise. We could hike them. But I think really the elephant in the room was the US elections. And it seems to me that they want to see where it's going before the US elections. You obviously denied that vociferously, but I think that's where it's going. I also don't think in of November, which is about a few days before the election, they will have the guts. But probably if the economy keeps on performing well, as it does, it will happen in December. And it needs to happen, because if the Fed doesn't go up, if the central banks don't raise their rates, at some stage when the next crisis comes, and it will come, the rate lever is not there anymore.
And actually, as you pointed out, the fact that this hasn't played too much in the presidential election, a few months ago, Donald Trump did say that if he became president, he would like more control over the Fed. And we've talked about this before, but not for quite some time. If he still maintains that and then does become president, how dangerous is it that the man sitting in the Oval Office should have this kind of control that he wants over the central bank?
I think that would be very dangerous, because you want this separation of powers. We have it here in England as well. I think under Tony Blair we had that separation of power, and it worked well. Yeah. And it worked well. And I mean, you saw when Brexit happened, it was good that we had an independent governor of the Bank of Japan that could come forward. There's a lot to be said for an independent central bank.
He says he would like more control, but whether he'd get that or not is another matter.
I thought the president could do what he wanted. If he's got Congress, if he's got Congress on his side.
They have this great thing called checks and balances,
yes,
which the forefathers of the American Constitution have thought about.
Talking of checks and balances, Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, is talking some more about something she discussed on the day she was appointed as Prime Minister. In her speech outside 10 Downing Street, she talked about the fact that she would look very closely at what company bosses are earning and the fact there's such a huge cavern between their earnings and the earnings of workers, and now she's saying more about that.
Well, and she's right, and there's this little controversy that you should maybe not look so much at Goldman Sachs because a lot of the bankers get compensated well, to which I would say, but the secretaries don't. I mean, if you look at what the secretaries get, but when you look at the FTSE 100, the pay ratio from the lowest paid to the chief executive is 1 to 129. That is quite a lot, and you should pay people fairly. You should pay chief executive fairly.
How would she implement this, though, Cornelia?
It's very difficult.
Easier said than done.
It's very easily said than done, but naming and shaming can get you somewhere. And if she starts to name and shame, then some chief executives may backtrack a little bit.
So Martin Sorrell isn't. He's the highest paid FTSE 100 boss.
Yeah, he pays himself though, doesn't he?
And
but
he's very out there saying, I deserve this, I'm worth it.
But some of them will. But there's something to be said for getting transparency. There's also something to be said if you have interns, you should pay them something. There is a lot of sort of exploitation going on.
Okay, we've only got 2 minutes, and I really like the Africa story.
So do I.
Because surely France needs to do more than hold a conference while China is busy saying to African countries, this is how we can help you, here we are, here's the money, let's do the deal. And France says, let's have a conference. Yeah,
well, America too. There's the US Africa Leaders Summit, which is sponsored by the US Department of Commerce. And yes, we're having these conferences, and you look at it, Africa is 1.2 billion people. That's as much as either China or India. Its landmass is
massive.
Its landmass is the US plus China plus India.
Plus Europe. Most of Europe. Look at a map. I'll tweet you the picture. We'll fight about this later.
But you look at it, and there's a lot of business, there's agribusiness, there's a lot of stuff that can be done, there's infrastructure needs, there's a lot that can be done. And we need the next India, we need the next China, so we need new markets.
Okay, Apple looking to do a deal with McLaren. It's heavily rumoured. Both companies at the moment very tight-lipped, probably for legal reasons if they are in discussions.
Yes, and I think it's very interesting. You see, Tim Cook is going into more of an aggressive M&A strategy. You also have Ron Dennis, the chairman of McLaren, who is sort of expanding what McLaren was doing. So in that sense, they are trying to do something new, and Tim Cook is taking Apple beyond just what they're doing.
Also, for Apple, it's great if they spend some money.
Time out, full-time whistle. Thank you very much, Cornelia. Always a huge pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
See you soon. Bye-bye.